is working, isn't it? I believe it is. Yes, excellent. That's a good start. I was... if you've come here to hear about squirrels and squirrels alone, I'm sorry. We're going to be a bit broader than that. They will get a mention a few times. But I thought Abby wasn't able to do the talk today, but I thought I'd stepped in and thought actually I'd broaden the subject a wee bit and talk about the mammal projects that Northumberland Wildlife Trust has been working on over the years, past, present, and indeed thinking about the future as well. So, it was mentioned, I started off in the physics department at Newcastle University, moved into working at Northumberland Wildlife Trust 28 years ago now, so don't know how many more years I'll do, but we'll see. Anyway, so mammal projects. I started, you can work it out. You can do the maths yourself. But at that end of the graph there, of the chart there, and I was thinking about what the main projects that we'd worked on over the years, and these I think sort of are the main species. From otters in the very early days through, red squirrels, they're constant all the way through. I think the very early dot should have been highlighted as well, actually, when I looked again a little bit later. Little bits on other species as well, and more so as we get into the more recent era. And I think that's actually tells us a little bit of the change of how we've thought about species over the years at somewhere like the Wildlife Trust. I remember very early on in those sort of mid-90s there, we were talking very much about, you build the habitat and the species will come. And it works to a point, but if the species aren't here, how are they going to come? So we have very much changed our views that reintroductions and opportunities for other species will just have to involve more intervention. Otherwise, we're just never going to achieve the sort of diversity that we feel we need for the future. So those are the main species. There's a few others we've been working on as well, bits and pieces. I probably could have added bats to that as well, and probably pretty much any other mammal at some point during the time that I've been at the Trust. But I'm not going to spend any time on those. They're relatively small projects that we've worked at. Other organisations have done a lot more work on these things. So I'll start with the past and think about where we came from those mid-90s days, and think about the sort of projects that we were working on in those at that time. First project, I think it is fair to say that the first sort of specific mammal project that the Trust worked on would be the Northumberland Otter project. This is Roebuck, the magazine of the Wildlife Trust, in spring 1986. And this was at a time when otters were really in a pretty poor way in the United Kingdom. The next plan, apologies, they're sort of just photographed from various publications. That map of 1985 map of where otters were in the UK at the time is quite stark. There's quite a lot up in Scotland, but in the rest of the UK, it's pretty poor. And in Northumberland was one of the few areas of England, apart from maybe Norfolk and certainly the south west country, where other than that, otters were just absent from the country, from England. 2002, 2003. By the time we'd sort of come to the end of the main emphasis on the otter project, those red dots are all positive otter sightings, and the blue squares as well are positive otter sightings. So they're actually, they are all over. They're from one end of the county of Northumberland to the other. They're everywhere by that stage. So in that sort of 15 years or so, is it? 15, 16 years. We managed to see a return of otters. I'm not saying Northumberland Wildlife Trust did it itself. There was lots of other people involved in this process, but it was about a number of things. It was about habitat improvements, fencing off riverbanks, allowing places for otters to rest up, but also, most importantly, I think it was about an attitude change. It was about people realising that this amazing animal had been almost lost from the country, and that actually it was quite important that we had it back. Fishermen had not liked them; they eat fish, and I think that suddenly that sort of the attitude managed to turn around. Otter hunting had gone by this stage, and they bounce back, and they bounce back pretty well. And actually, they're now in the entirety of England as well. So, and it's spread out from places like Northumberland, the West Country, and all of those sort of areas. So, I think it was a really positive project, but it was a lot of it, like everything, is about attitude and about in persuading people that it's a great thing to do. And I'm just going to sort of, I won't talk too much more on otters. Oh, it's not. I need to click it to go. And we don't do an awful lot directly on otters any longer. We did many years of survey work, checking the numbers across up to that 2002-2003 period. I tried it, did it again after that. Days and days of wandering along bits of river, smelling otter poo. That's how it's all done. So just as that one's leaving some behind. But we're still, it's still amazing to see. This is at Redesdale on our Revitalising Redesdale project in 2020. So there are, it's great to see them on the sort of very small burns on the hills in Northumberland, even now. Red squirrels was the next big project, and actually projects, I should say, because our work on red squirrels has been going on, since the 90s, the early 90s, and it's taken many different guises in that time. Sometimes they've been pretty big projects with lots of people working on them. Sometimes they've been down to one person or even part of a person working for us, working and pushing on the squirrel conservation angle. So, the reason we're doing that, of course, is that is the decline. That is where we're seeing that change in squirrel populations from 1945 at the far end, where red squirrels were pretty common throughout most of England, to 2010, so it's 10 years out of date, 50 years out of date, sorry, at this end, where we're holding on to small populations or some populations within Northumberland and Cumbria, and little pockets in Yorkshire. There was a thing on the news the other day about some squirrels being discovered in Yorkshire. So there are a few little pockets, and down round by Formby in Merseyside. So, and really the only sort of places that they sort of stay reasonably in reasonably good numbers are on some of this islands. So Isle of Wight and Brownsea Island and Poole Harbour as well, isn't it? So. So we've seen a huge decline in grey squirrels from 1945 through to 2010, and that's primarily and almost solely to do with the grey squirrel. The American grey squirrel introduced 1876 into the UK, and it's a number of things. It's about competition for food, partly. That second one doesn't affect the red squirrel particularly, but the last one, squirrel pox, is probably the most important factor, and the most important factor why our red squirrel numbers are declining. American grey squirrels carry squirrel pox, but are unaffected by it. They pass them on to the red squirrels if they come in contact or close quarters to them, and and most red squirrels then die from that disease. There are a few don't. It's like most diseases. There will be a few survivors from that process. And if that was all it was, there was a sort of outbreak and it went through, and the carrier was no longer present, we'd probably had a massive decline in red squirrels and then a bounce back. But we don't, because there's constant reinfection into the system through the grey squirrels moving around and carrying that disease unaffected. So. The effect of grey squirrels is primarily the reason for the loss of red squirrels. There are other factors, of course, about loss of habitat and fragmentation of woodlands. And we talk a lot about, or have talked a lot about, conifer woodlands being a sort of holding place for red squirrels because they're more attractive to reds than they are to greys. But that's not the red's sort of primary habitat. The red wants to be in that mixed woodlands habitat. It's just that they're even better for grey squirrels. So we've got a number of problems. We've got lots of problems which haven't gone away. And I'll return to red squirrels as we move on through the present. We're on the past at the moment. We'll move on to the present in a little bit later. One other little project that sort of happened in the sort of early 2000s, 2002, 3, 4, was look at harvest mice in the county, and there were a few scattered sightings and scattered locations for harvest mice, but they'd largely gone, and we're back to East Chevington here again. So we're talking, East Chevington Reserve. They were introduced through a project working with Newcastle University and Castle Morton Borough Council at the time to look at reintroduction of harvest mice onto the East Chevington Nature Reserve. So these little things were put out. They were a bit of follow-up monitoring. They're really hard to monitor because they're pretty tiny. Well, they're very tiny, and they don't really trigger camera traps. Even if they do trigger camera traps, they're too small to be. The focus is wrong, so you don't really see them, and they don't really easily trigger other traps as well. So they're really difficult to find again. But you do look for the nests in vegetation and can find those. But I have to confess that after a little while, after a bit of follow-up monitoring from the release, things went a bit quiet, and we sort of forgot about them, which is probably a bit unfair and harsh on them, but we sort of did. And I'll come back to that later as well, because it's talking about the past. One of the other projects that we've worked on a lot is the water vole. And perhaps I should preface this with the fact that we were for many years, I think as a conservation bodies across the United Kingdom, this is not specifically about the Wildlife Trust in Northumberland or indeed anywhere else in the current county, we watched their decline. We surveyed them and surveyed them and surveyed them and just watched them disappear. And that was probably one of the biggest conservation errors, I think, over the last 20 years, is just to see them go and not actually do very much about it. So when we finally realised we needed to do something about it, we started working out what that was. And there's two things you need to do. Projects we've worked on alongside Forestry England and Tyne Rivers Trust, funded by the Lottery Fund, was an early from 2013, we did a number of I'm just going to put them all down, a number of different projects. They have different names sometimes, different emphases. We pulled together Restoring Ratty, phase 1, phase 2, and then we got the water voles back into Kielder. Now that isn't just done. You don't just plonk a load of water voles back into Kielder. You have to do one fundamental thing first, and that is remove the mink. American mink are a basically destroyer of water voles. They're an invasive, non-native species that has come in for various reasons, partly through releases from mink farms or escapes from mink farms in the past, and they are exactly the right size to fit down a water vole burrow, and they love to follow watercourses and just nip in and basically completely destroy the water vole populations that we've got there. So you've got to make sure you're in an area without mink before, or with very, very low numbers of mink, before you can start doing any sort of reintroductions. There are quite important factors about reintroductions are that you can't just shove things out into a place that they're just going to get eaten or die. You've got to follow certain rules and regulations, certain protocols and processes. So we had to do a few years in the development phase of this and the early stage of the project to make sure that mink were no longer present in the Kielder forest area, or were they're never going to be not present completely, but in very low numbers. So that was the first stage, and then we first introduced them in 2017. And subsequent to that, the Natural and Native Project has been trying to control mink across a slightly wider area. So as you can move out from that core area you've cleared them from and move out. And there's been some news items recently about East Anglia, where they're now saying that they're pretty much sure that they've cleared mink from East Anglia. Great news. Let's get it done for the rest of the country. So the process of water vole releases is it looks quite industrial, doesn't it? All of those cages across there have got water voles, 1, 2, 3, 4 water voles in them. Bred, in this case down in Devon. If we do future projects, we might see if we can find somewhere more local to do that. But bred down in Devon and then brought up and then released first, most of them released first into these pens that you put out on the riverbanks. Left in there for a couple of days, fed, a bit with apples and carrots and all sort of stuff like that. Real natural and native species they're going to find when they get released. But anyway, they're fed on those for a couple of days. Doors are then opened, and then you continue to do a bit of feeding, but they can wander in and out. And most of them just disappear at that point and disappear off into the big wide world. Some stay put and think, no, it's better off where we are, until we stop feeding them, of course. So many of these cages were put out onto the sort of very small watercourses across Kielder Forest in large numbers of various different locations. Water voles introduced into them and then let out into the world outside. A few occasionally there were two techniques. So that's a soft release, what we call soft release. You can do a hard release, which is basically just taking them from those trays at the far side and then just taking the watercourse and just letting them go. And we tried both techniques, and we use both methods. They are pretty good at eating stuff, so they should be fairly okay just being released and get on with, as long as there's food for them, they should be fine. So we use those two methods. And that's a plot from 2023 about occupancy and sort of it's not particularly clear, but the positive surveys, the pink ones. So, 2017, 2018 to 2020, I think they were released. So 3 years later, they're still present in many of those locations. So that's a great sign. That's what we want to see. And actually, we picked up some miles away from where they were released as well. That's an interesting thing, just as an aside. Mammals tend to have two, particularly the males of the species, tend to have two different characteristics about them. Some are, stay where they're born and don't move very far, and some are travellers and they will disappear off. And there are, I think, examples up in northeast Scotland where the water voles have moved 30 miles from where they were released. That's a long way for a water vole, particularly when everything wants to eat you on the way. So. And as another little aside, actually, it's interesting because when we were releasing the harvest mice, there were people saying, "Oh, there's no point. You just putting owl food." Yes, that's what we are doing, because let's face it, it is that whole system you're trying to create. It's not water voles and harvest mice simply for the sake of those animals, though it is for them, but they are going to get eaten, and we shouldn't be frightened about that because they are prey species. They will be eaten. They are designed, if that's the right way of putting it, to be eaten and to breed in sufficient numbers to be able to cope with that sort of thing. So we shouldn't be shocked by the fact that those water voles get eaten, and the fact you've just released one and it gets taken by a heron 10 minutes later is an unfortunate incident, but it's what happens. And we'll do a quick plug because one of our volunteers has just written a book, which he is. It's about to be. I think it's not quite on the shelves as yet, but keep a look out for it if you're interested. That gives you a lot more detailed and personal view of the work of releasing and restoring water voles to the Kielder Forest area. So the present. So what are we doing at the moment? Those are all sort of past. Those are things we've been doing in the past. What about now? Well. I've mentioned before, we're coming back to squirrels time and time again because, yes, we're still working on squirrels and we'll continue to work on them. And the aim of the current sort of Red Squirrels Northern England project is an attempt to try and maintain the range of red squirrels in Northern England. So we have 6 rangers employed by us. Some are employed, some are contractors. We control grey squirrels. A lot of work goes into that, particularly in areas where there are red squirrel populations and near those, and we do a lot of monitoring as well of population sizes to see what's actually happening. So I'm just sort of talking briefly about the monitoring side of it. So spring monitoring program is done every March to May. We're looking at presence absence. We're not looking at numbers in that. We're just looking at presence and absence in areas. And there's 250 random locations across the north of England that have been chosen. They're at random. They're not supposed to be. We're not supposed to be out there simply to look for red squirrels. We're there to look for what's there, whether it be red or grey. And if you don't find, you shouldn't be specifically trying to target one or the other in terms of what you're looking for, because you need to try and get just a general sense about what the numbers are doing. And that's the monitoring in numbers, just a few numbers, there's lots of numbers on there, sorry. So what does it tell us? And I think the results side is the important bit in that. It's probably a little bit unreasonable to have an arrow pointing upwards on 50 to 52%. I think that's statistically is pretty steady. So red numbers are steady. We're managing to maintain some sort of range of red squirrels. Grey occupancy, however, has gone up. And I think we all see, most of us who go out in the countryside and see and walk and look around Northumberland will probably confirm that. You see more grey squirrels than you probably ever have done. So we're not winning. We're not winning that fight yet. We're maintaining red range. So these are the results not just of that survey, but of a whole host of different methods of getting data in. So we are maintaining a range of red squirrels, but you'll see the grey squirrel range is almost identical, which is, a particular concern, I suppose, to that long-term conservation. And we'll come back to red squirrels again in the future. So that's where we are with squirrels. Sorry. So back onto harvest mice. What are we doing now with them? Well, after abandoning them a little bit for a few years, we thought we'd better actually have a look and see what we had. And to our, surprise is the wrong word. We were pleased to find that we still had harvest mice at East Chevington Nature Reserve. That was great news that by the time we came back into the about 2019, I think, when we first sort of started looking again for those, they were still present. The nests were there. So I think the concern you have is with that sort of scenario is that there was a relatively small number of mice released in that first release. So the genetic diversity of those mice is going to be dwindling. So ideal location, not for reintroduction, but for an augmentation. So boosting that number by adding new mice into the system. And we've now working with Northumberland Zoo up at Eshet, who are undertaking a breeding program for us to breed mice, harvest mice for release. And we've put out, it says there 39 have been put out at East Chevington this year. 39 would be too few if you were trying to do a reintroduction. But because you're actually augmenting an existing population, that's fine, that's okay, and it's good for the numbers there. So we've sort of moved them slightly away from the existing populations so that they're not overlapping, they don't fight too much, and move them out. But that allows us to get the mice out into the environment. And I think the next stage, and I suppose I'm verging into the future here, but the next stage is to think about how we do further introductions across that wider landscape of Druridge Bay. If we can get harvest mice on more sites across Druridge Bay, and the habitat is fantastic. That's a rough grassland, those reed beds, great places for harvest mice. So if we can get them further out, that'd be brilliant for this species, and good for the owls, of course. So one of the questions we've had is how you do the sort of information we were getting is suggesting that you need about 200 mice to do a reintroduction. Well, it's actually quite hard to get 200 mice in one go. And they love to fight each other and do all sorts of things, so that's a lot of cages. So we're just looking at the moment about whether we can actually do more like sort of 30 or so at a time, but more times over the year, and whether that should provide the same result without the need of one big batch of mice in one go. Much easier logistically to deal with, and hopefully we can get to understand a little bit more about that shortly. We're doing a bit of work on pine martens at the moment. Not a huge amount, I must admit, but we're doing some. And there's some work across Northumberland, and we're a partner in those projects, looking at pine martens and how they're coming back. This is not a reintroduction program because actually they're doing it themselves. And that's the best way for it, if they can do that. What we're doing instead is, rather than introducing, is doing two things. One is putting den boxes, or working with others to put den boxes up. So den boxes allow us to monitor the numbers and see where they are and what they're using. And then the other thing which ecologists love to do is to look for poo. And weird things that pine martens, they love forest tracks. So makes it easy because you can just walk along forest tracks and you can find all sorts of various coloured poo that turned out to be pine marten. So what this one's been eating, I have no idea, but never mind. And actually, we did a transect up in part of Kielder Forest, and there were 13. We found 13 scats of pine marten in that, which is the biggest number in England, I think, so far found in one transect. So that's great news. They are coming back, and they're coming back to Northumberland, and they're doing it themselves. So that's brilliant. So, going a little bit more controversial maybe, but yeah, we're moving. So what else are we doing? We're working on a links project, and we've been working on this for a few years now. A lot of planning went into this project with Lifescape Project is our main partner, and the Wildlife Trust nationally are our partners in this project. And I'm not trying to take credit for their work. A lot of this work I'm talking about now for the next few slides is from Lifescape Project, our partners in this one, collectively making up the Missing Links project. And this project is not at the moment about releasing links, because this is a little bit more tricky than harvest mice. They're a little bit more controversial. They're not owl food, so they are actually going to be the other way around. So this is more difficult, and so the phase we've got to do is to do two things. First of all, understand the ecology and whether ecologically Northumberland would work for a release of links. And so the modelling that's been done is it was looking at various release sites across the UK. So we looked at Kielder, looked at Galloway, and they looked at the Highlands. And the Highlands has been modelled before, but this is a remodelling just as confirmation. And so if you look at Kielder, this is 100 years after the release. So Kielder, they spread out across the north of England, mostly southern Scotland. Galloway does similar, but not quite as extensive. The M74 provides a major barrier to them. And then the Highland one is producing quite a nice big coverage of the Highlands. Of course, the problem between those is the central belt of Scotland, which is forming your major barrier at that point. But if you do Kielder and the Highlands together, you can make a really sort of the whole of the north of the UK can become a viable area for links. And if you look at the number sort of suggestions that it's coming up with, it's talking about 50 population in Kielder after 100 years, 200 to 250 in the Highlands, and collectively about 300 links potentially across that Northern England patch. So that's the ecology. The ecology says yes, we've got enough connectivity of forests, we've got enough habitat, we've got enough food are deer, mainly roe deer. We all pretty much know, I imagine, that we've got many of them. And so roe deer numbers are not a problem. There's all of those things fall into place. The problem with something like a lynx is that you've got to get the social side as well. So the social acceptability of a species like this needs to be in place. So we've been doing a roadshow, a sort of exhibition around parts of Northumberland. We started that in, I think, was it March or April last year. We did a number of locations. Some of you may recognise Hexham Abbey as one of those. I'll be slightly more impressed if you recognise Tarset Village Hall at that far end, but you never know, you might do. And just to plug it, it's currently, this week, is on at the Northern Stage in Newcastle. So there's some leaflets outside. Pick one of those up. Have a look and get yourself along if you can. Go onto the website, it tells you what time it's open and when you can go along. So it's about the links, it's about their ecology, it's about lots of questions that people might ask about them, about what they eat and all of those things. Are they a danger to people? No, they're not. Are they a danger to your dog, your cat? Not really. Those sort of questions are all answered in that exhibition. So get yourself along if you're interested and find out a bit more. And also, really share your views. Sorry, it's a massive QR code there. If you want to take it and fill in the questionnaire, give you a couple of minutes. But so this is really the project is about. At the moment, it's about social acceptability and about whether we think we can do that, and there's enough support for it in this part of the world. So the future. Where do we go from here? And I think there's won't start with lynx. We'll start with squirrels again. Go back to them yet again. We are having actually a lottery assessment tomorrow from lottery fund to look at our next big project, which is Red Squirrel's Recovery Network, which is not just looking at Northern England now, but the realisation, it's taken a while maybe, but the realisation that actually functionally, and actually, sorry, if you go back to remember the lynx maps, our functional eco area is the southern Scotland, northern England. It's not. It isn't down to the Pennines. It's north. Our most important border for Northumberland, from an ecological point of view, is that Scottish-English border, and politically quite a tricky one to work across. But that's the important one. So we're trying to work across the Cumbria, Northumberland, and the borders of Scotland, Dumfries, Galloway borders, to try and do a much wider project across that area. Yes, there'll still be some consideration of grey squirrel control. We are holding the line doing that. Remember, not trying to solve the problem. We're only going to solve the problem if we find a different technique. And the different techniques are going to be, will have their controversy behind them, I'm sure, but they are going to be actually somehow stopping the grey from being a problem. And one of the options is contraceptive. It's tricky to give them it. And so that is the challenge. That is the challenge of one of the challenges of this next project is to work out mechanisms by which you can get contraceptives to grey squirrels and not to red squirrels. And there's a number of interesting things you can do on that. There are weighted feeders. So red squirrels are too light, are light, and they won't be able to get in, and grey squirrels are heavy, and they won't be able to get in it. Don't ask me the design, I don't know. There are other techniques actually coming on, which is to do with AI recognition so you can use that as a squirrel approaches. It will recognise whether it's a red squirrel or a grey squirrel, regardless of what angle it's facing at the time, and it will then decide whether it can let the animal in to get the contraceptive or not. So there's that. So part of the next project is to see whether it can be done safely and effectively without actually giving them the contraceptive in this time, because it's not yet licensed for use in the field. There's also gene editing. Don't ask me about that. I don't know much about it. It's a little bit beyond my knowledge area at the moment, but essentially it's something that stops grey squirrels from reproducing anyway. I'll leave it at that. Don't ask me about that. If anyone wants to ask a question about that, don't. So that's the next phase here is we've got to do something different. We can't continue with the same old management of just trying to keep grey squirrels at bay, because let's face it, it's only just holding the line. And it's not really working, and in the long run, it probably can't work. So we have to find a different technique in order to make this work for the future and protect the red squirrels. Otherwise, we will end up with red squirrels probably only above the central belt of Scotland, on places like, maybe on Anglesey still, and on Isle of Wight and places like that, and we'll lose them from most of the UK. I should actually mention pine martens in this as well while I'm at it, because pine martens actually can be a really positive benefit in this process, because pine martens find it very easy to catch grey squirrels, but they find it really difficult to catch reds. And I'm definitely not saying that pine martens will never kill a red squirrel. Of course they will. They will get them now and again, but the two species, pine martens and red squirrels, have evolved together in the UK, and therefore they are co-evolved, and therefore they cope with each other. And yes, there's some predation, but it shouldn't have a major impact on populations. Bigger effect on populations by a long way are disease and human interference and being run over by cars and all sorts of things. So there's lots and lots of things that are in the way. Pine martens aren't it, and pine martens could have a positive benefit, and there's some work in Ireland at the moment suggesting that there is quite a potentially big positive benefit in terms of how much they take the grey squirrels out of the system. Water voles we'll come back to. We're returning to water voles. We've had a bit of a gap on how much we're working. We're doing a little bit of continued mink control, but I think our next aim is probably to look at whether we can get Druidge Bay with water voles again. So that'll involve more mink trapping or checking that there's not many mink in the area. There's not that many. We've caught 3, I think, this year. And hopefully, if that works, if we can get those numbers down low, we can get water voles back into Druidge Bay. Hopefully working with Northumberland Zoo to do the breeding now, so that they're not coming all the way from Devon, they're coming just from down the road. And that's, and the great thing about Druidge Bay is that because it's reed beds, it's quite scattered and quite spread out. Even a few mink won't wipe out populations in those places. They tend to use straight line watercourses. If you've got a load of water vole burrows down a watercourse, the mink will go up the watercourse and eat everything. But if you've got a big scattered reed bed, there's actually still places where they can get away from it. So even a few mink won't be the end of water voles in this area, but you do need to keep the numbers down a bit. So, quite a lot. So hopefully, not too far in the future, we'll be getting water voles back into Druidge Bay. And then lynx, we don't know. We've got to wait for the social consultation. So I'm certainly not here to preempt what we're talking about, what's going to happen and what's going to come out of that. But, if it's acceptable, if we can accept it and people can accept them coming back, could we get the animal back into Kielder and into Northumberland? What would that mean? What would that bring? Well, it would mean hopefully a bit of a change in the dynamic on how many deer we have around the area. We probably won't see them very often because they're incredibly difficult to spot. But it could mean not just stuff to do with the actual ecology, but tourism as well works in some places. This is Bad Harzburg in the Harz Mountains in Germany. The town is covered in lynx stuff. Everything is lynx logoed. There's a lynx walk. You go past an enclosure where there's 3 lynx that are unable to be released because they're too tame. You can see the lynx in the enclosure. Even the cups and saucers at the places have got lynx on them. Everything is lynx based, and it brings in loads of sort of interest to that area. Not sure saying we have exactly the same thing, but it's a possibility. And then of course I haven't mentioned beavers yet, and beavers are probably one of the biggest impacts we could have on our wetlands and watercourses, on our flooding, all of those things that are problems to society could be, I won't say they're all going to be solved. Society's problems are not going to be solved by beavers. I'd better just come back a little bit from that. But some of them might be. So, this is there's 2 pictures on the far side are an enclosure in Yorkshire, which that's the dam. It's about 2.5 metres tall, I think, at that point. And it's the longest dam in England, or longest dam in the UK, I think. It's miles long, and they've built this thing up. And they're great engineers. They build wonderful pools and wetland systems. This one on this side is in Argyll at the where they've been there for a while now. So you've got this different dynamic. You get these dead, flooded out trees. You get the wetland systems. All of this, and you get new scrub growth. You get a whole host of different things. And you reduce your flooding potential downstream, most importantly. So let's see if we can get those back in. Now, how do we do it? Because, well, let's move on. We had to have a gnawed tree, of course. I have a picture of that. That's in Yorkshire as well. But there's a map of where the habitat suitability is. So the green and the dark, very dark colours mean it's good suitability, opportunities for beavers. That's Northumberland. It's not a very useful map in the sense that if you don't know your geography of Northumberland really well, it's not going to help you, is it? Because there's no features whatsoever on it of use. But there's some areas, and quite a lot of those upland areas are pretty poor quality habitat for them. But on a catchment basis, sub-catchment basis, you can see some quite interestingly dark areas which are supposed to be suitable, or could be suitable. This is a modelling data. It would need more work than that if you wanted to find out in detail. People probably know that there's an enclosure at Wallington, where the only beavers that we have in the county, apart from occasional scapie, the only beavers we have in the county are in that enclosure at the moment. I think from a wildlife trust point of view, we're hoping that the government will finally say something about non-enclosure, free-running beavers, free-roaming beavers. That won't come easy, because even if they allow us to do that, we'll still have to do lots of consultation about whether that's possible or not. I think there's a different glimmer of hope on this one, and that is Scotland. It's not very far away. And the beavers are spreading throughout Scotland pretty well. And there's certainly sort of rumours about them being on the Tweed now, certainly on the Forth. They're coming to the Tweed. It won't be that long. So actually, I think we can probably wait. We probably don't need to do a massive project on beavers in the county. 3 or 4 years' time, they'll be in the county. I can almost guarantee it. And they'll have come naturally from Scotland. So perhaps we're in a position where we can wait. It'll be more difficult further south. So, just to sort of almost finish off with what else? What else could we do? Well, bison. Bison have now been released in Kent. There are lots of, not problems with the bison. The bison are doing a great job. But there's lots of practical problems about bison, and particularly legal problems about how we treat animals and how we look at animals in this country. So, anything that is anything that's a wild animal falls under the Wild Animals Act, and therefore it's got to be enclosed. Anything that's seen to be a domestic animal has to go through all the domestic stuff, and you've got to do TB testings and all sorts of stuff, and you movements and all sorts of complexity. The rules are endless, and the potential for something like more free roaming, more bison is tricky at the moment, until some of those rules can be relaxed a bit. There's a picture of an elk in the middle. I just put that in because I like elk. They'd be great, wouldn't they, roaming through Kielder Forest. But again, maybe that's a little bit further down the line. And I couldn't do this without mentioning wolf, because we talk about lynx being controversial. That's a step beyond. Sadly I can't see that happening in the near future at all. They are, in parts of Europe, they are amazing in what they achieve and what they do. And their sort of movement across the landscape, movement is huge. They move enormous distances, and they impact on that sort of large herbivore, mainly deer, but quite considerably. But they do incredibly little harm to humans. What they do harm to, and it can't be denied, they do take livestock, particularly sheep, Could we ever think of wolves in this country? Well, be great, but unfortunately we've got the English Channel in the way, and that's going to stop them, because they're in Netherlands, they're in most of Europe now, but not here. So maybe we'll just have to accept for the minute that we're going to have to look at the sort of, I suppose they're proxies to the sort of natural system. So this is a Taurus. This is sort of the attempt to recreate something like a auroch. In Europe, they're becoming quite popular. Again, the controversy and the problems are that we've got their livestock still, and they're not wild, and they're not, all of those issues. But these will have to be these could be our proxies to that natural grazing pattern. For the minute, I think we'll have to come down one further step and probably just deal with cattle, I imagine, until we can get past some of the hurdles that exist, if it's appropriate to do so, of course. And so, it's a brief run through what we've been working on in Northumberland in the last few years. I did have to ask colleagues whether I'd forgotten anything. I don't think I have, nothing particularly significant. But there is a huge number of staff have been involved in this over the years. Loads of volunteers have put in huge number of hours, particularly on the waterfowl project. Enormous number of hours on that. And it sounds exciting, doesn't it? Waterfowls and mammals, but actually most of it's really dull. Most of it's just looking for poo. And they're quite little as well. Lots of funders, and I'm not mentioning them all here, but loads and loads of people have helped with the work we've been doing over those many, many years. and of course partner organisations that, where we've been working with loads of different conservation organisations, government agencies, and all sorts of other people in what we've been doing. So there you go.